Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We'll get the latest on Luke Cromenhawk from Florida State and what's happening there. Steve, am I saying that right? Luke Cromenhawk is the FSU guy?
That's almost perfect, Bo. That's almost. And I had to ask him yesterday. When I talked to him, I was like, "Man, how do you pronounce your last name?" Because I've heard it a lot. I hadn't watched him Florida State games this year that he played in, and you can tell the kid gets it a lot. He's like, "Hey, so it's Crow, then Men, and then Hawk." And then he says it all together. That's exactly, and I can only begin to imagine how fans are going to butcher that over the next couple of years. But that is correct.
Okay, so Luke Cromenhawk, Florida State QB. And Steve, I want to read what Tom Luganbill sent me earlier. I don't know much about him, okay? He said he's a damn good young player that was put in an impossible position. Said, reminds me of Curtis Rourke when Curtis was its sophomore at Ohio. He went on to say Luke showed a lot of poise and toughness while getting his ass kicked. Is the Luke Cromenhawk to Mississippi State a done deal?
I think it's pretty close. And what I mean by that is I think, and I said this on my show last night, a lot of these young guys aren't used to being interviewed by people that are professional interviewers, right? And so I push a little bit sometimes without being rude, because you want to get a reaction, because there's some questions they're already prepared for, And so, you get him talking about the school, and I said, so what about a decision? They talk to you about a decision. And it's like, he's like, well, we're going to take some time, And so I think he knows what he wants to do. It's just a matter of the formalities kind of being worked out. I think it could be announced as early as today. I mean, and then he doesn't have any other visits set up. And, so it's like I said to you, the Jackson Arnold thing. I mean, Jackson Arnold visited Auburn first for a reason. And, of course, with the gift of hindsight, things make a lot more sense to us. Luke Cromenhawk visited Mississippi State first for a reason. These quarterbacks are a little different cat, right? I mean, these guys, they got to make decisions earlier than some other people do. And I think there's some parallels in those situations. And we always talk about that. Watch the visits. When you look at the visits here and who they visit, who they don't visit, and what else they talk about, it makes sense.
So are you at, 95% that Luke Cromenhawk is a dog?
I'd say 90%. Yeah, I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the final days of recruiting, but I just think, especially with quarterbacks, it's like, and even with high school level, but certainly in the portal, it's a business, and it's a bigger business this year than it's ever been before, and we can talk about that whenever you want, but it's crazy what's going on in college football these days with people kind of draining their collectives, and you got rev share coming, and it's just so much out there. It's been a Pandora's box, and we're seeing it now. But I think, the fact that there's just so little time to make a decision now, the dead period opens, after the visits on Sunday. I mean, we go from contact period to a quiet period, and it's dead from Monday all the way to January the 5th. And so you're not going to have an opportunity to take any visits between now and January 5th. And so if you're a quarterback and you're considering multiple schools, I think you'd want to take those visits before the dead period.
Do you think he's going anywhere in the next few days?
I would be surprised. I really would be. And one of the things that kind of impressed me about the young guy too is he remembers how Jeff Levy treated him when he was coming out of high school. Like, he ultimately turned Levy down to go to Florida State, but he remembers how Jeff handled that. And he told me that. He said, hey, when he went down and had the in-home visit, and Levy just told him he thought he was a big-time guy, thought he fit the scheme. And so whenever everybody started, calling it when he's back in the portal, he remembered that. He remembered how Jeff Levy made him feel. And so, they've got an opportunity, and I want to go up there and at least go visit Coach Levy again. And he had a lot of other schools that wanted him to come in, but he chose to visit Mississippi State and Jeff Levy. And and I agree with Tom's comments too. I had somebody else in the industry that texted me yesterday just saying, hey, I don't know that this young man's getting enough due for what they put him through at Florida State this year. And he was put in an impossible situation, and he handled it with grace. But And people think, oh, well, maybe he'll go back. And, you never say never to that, Bo, but I think it's pretty safe to say that he's probably had all the Florida State he wants.
Okay. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show, Gene's page, 247 Sports. And we're talking Luke Kromenhoek. Was at Florida State. Steve believes 90% chance he'll end up in Starkville. He did go on the first visit to Starkville, and as Steve just laid out, he's got a relationship with Jeff Levy because Levy recruited him big time out of high school. Okay, so when do you think he'll make the call?
I think it'll be this week. Do
you think he'll make it before Saturday or by Saturday? How do you see that, Steve?
Well, I think if you're Jeff Levy in Mississippi State, you'd like him to do it, sooner rather than later, because especially there's a couple of wide receivers you're still chasing, and you got some running backs coming to campus this week, and so you want the drawing card, right? I mean, it's like you want the headline making, commitment, and so, I'd hate to say it's going to come today and then it doesn't, and people get all down and depressed, but I think it could come as early as today. But I do think it comes this week. I think the kid is ready to enjoy Christmas. You know what I mean? And he kind of made as much comment yesterday about that. It's like, my family also want to get this thing done sooner rather than later, just so we can kind of enjoy the holidays together and make plans, to relocate and transfer. And, you don't want to have it all hanging over your head during Christmas. And so I do think it comes this week. But as far as, can I pick a day right now? I don't know that I could.
What about his mobility and running? Luke Kromenhoek, possibly Jeff Levy's with Blake Shapen, potential next starter or whatever. Do you know anything about that as far as his athletic ability, athleticism, dual threat, all that?
Yeah, he's not Nick Fitzgerald, okay, but he's got some of that in his game. He is the guy that you can actually run some design QB run plays for, and I think Mike Van Buren can run some of those things too. Mike's not as big as Luke is, but I don't know how much Jeff Levy wants to run the quarterback until you absolutely have to run a quarterback just to kind of keep people honest. But yeah, he's capable of doing those things. We've had some quarterbacks in the past that, when they had to go run, it looked a little bit awkward. This guy's a natural athlete. And so I think, as far as the mobility piece goes, he's not a statue back there, but he's also not, run first quarterback. So he's got a true dual threat capability.
Yeah, you haven't had a natural athlete at the quarterback position since Garrett Schrader. I know Shapen is, and what I mean by that, Steve, is play a bunch of games. Blake Shapen is a hell of an athlete, but he got knocked out early, and so he didn't get to put up 8, 10, 12 games. You need a dude. Now, that was interesting what you said. See, I think you've got to run it and run it a lot. Take Fitzgerald out. That's a different deal. He's a leading rushing quarterback in the history of the SEC. But I think you got to run it a pretty good bit, kind of like Corral Dart at Ole Miss at Mississippi State. You just said you're not sure how much Levy wants to run it. That's a concern to me because when Mississippi State wins, Rocky Felker, John Bond, Don Smith, Sleepy, Dak, Fitz, and what I think Garrett Schrader could have been, when they win, they have a battering ram, a dude who can go get yards with their legs. What are your thoughts on my theory?
Well, I think that's always a possibility. But, Jackson Dart didn't run it as much this year, maybe that he has recently. And I think Matt Corral kind of ran some of that based on the opportunities that were available to him based on matchups. But, I think that's just, you have to have the athletic quarterback that can make plays because you have to account for him in the running game. It doesn't allow defenses to just, have 11 to defend 10. But, I think, ideally what they'd like to do is have him run it just enough to keep people honest. And then, in some situations you use him because, especially around the goal line. But, I think Jeff really wants to grip it and rip it, but not the way Mike Leach did. I think there's some air raid elements in this, and I think there's probably even some zone read elements of the spread in this. But I think at the end of the day, Jeff Levy just wants to win. And if that requires his quarterback to run it 20 times a game, that's what he'll do, But I think, this is a quarterback that gives you some options where you can have a different game plan.
A mutual friend of ours that's heavily involved with Mississippi State said, find somebody that loves you like Jeff Lebby loves Blake Shapen. We talked about the risk of running all the assistant coaches back. Now, there may be a change over the holidays. You know, there's all this stuff around David Turner, whatever. There needs to be more than that, but yeah, that's not going to placate the fan base, but whatever, you know, something may shake. Your thoughts on running it back with Blake Shapen, who we know is talented, but just has never been able to play more than 6 or 7 games. And didn't even play that many this past year, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the concern, because it's what's interesting, too, is it's not the same injury, right? I mean, if it was a recurrence of the same injury, you'd say, well, this kid's just never going to be able to get right. But it's been a different deal, right, the whole way through. I mean, he had the knee injury, then he had the concussion injury, and then now this is a shoulder injury, you know. And, you know, when he was healthy, you know, he did some really good things. I mean, you know, saved the Arizona State game, you know, the first half in that ball game. I thought he was what you needed, you know. But, you know, I think your friend's comment is probably accurate. I just kind of got the sense, even leading up to the season last year, and I asked Jeff in the spring, I was like, you know, hey, what's this quarterback relationship like? I mean, does he envision offense the way you do? And I'm kind of paraphrasing him, but Jeff was like, yeah, he sees offense and team play exactly the same way that I do. And, you know, you mentioned that about him running it back. I remember getting that text that Saturday after the Florida game, you know, that he was not going to continue. And at that point, it's like, well, that's the season. You know, any chance that you had of getting remotely close to 6 wins was out the door when Blake Shapen goes down for the year. And you're like, well, you know, Van Buren's got to go on the road and play Texas and Georgia, you know. And I think the young man went and acquitted himself. But I think sometimes people forget that Blake Shapen was the starter this year and that Blake Shapen is capable of leading this program next year. And I think the way the quarterback room is going to potentially play out, that it's going to be a Blake Shapen offense again next year.
Wow. Steve Robertson, genespage.com, 247 Sports. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. How many more guys do you expect them to get in the boat transfer portal wise by Sunday?
So by Sunday, that's an interesting caveat, right? I mean, Levy said on signing day it's going to be about 15. Well, you're at 7 now, but I think you'll probably be double digits by the end of the weekend. You know, you got several visitors coming in. What's today? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's going to be a busy second half of this week. And, you know, a lot of these guys are maybe starting to feel a little sense of urgency now too, you know, because we're basically through the middle of December and these guys got to make plans to, you know, to move after the holidays to their new location, whether it be Mississippi State or somewhere else. And so I think you're going to see the pace pick up a little bit around the country as guys begin to finalize some decisions. And again, this is the last weekend you can visit before the dead period is lifted in January. So I think State will probably pick up 3 to 4, if not more, between now and the close of business on Sunday. I do think there'll be double digits. And I think you could be higher than, you could be close to a dozen or so based on the guys that are coming in, because you got some other guys coming in too. You've still got a couple JUCO guys coming in taking visits too. You got a linebacker and a running back, you know, and so that State and Ole Miss are both chasing those guys. And so there's a lot of recruiting left to happen over the course of the next, always say 72 hours. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things happen, not just at Mississippi State, but kind of around the conference in these next few days. It's going to shape the rosters.
How concerned or disappointed should Mississippi State fans be with Hutzler and David Turner not pulling defensive line guys or defensive guys to the level that they need yet? Or do you believe they need to be patient?
Well, I think you can do both. I mean, I think you can be concerned, and I think you can also be patient. You know, because again, you don't judge the glass until it's complete. But you know, the reality of it, it's based on what you've seen so far. The defensive end bodies have been there, but the defensive tackles haven't, and that's the thing. People like a guy on MS Sports today, where's the beef? I think that's the question that you have. Is you knew that was a glaring issue for the team, and you've got to address it. And granted, there's not a lot of high caliber defensive tackles in the portal yet, but I think a lot of people would feel better if just more of those guys were coming in to visit, and they'll get some guys, but the fans just don't want a body, right? I mean, want a guy that's going to be a difference maker, and people forget. I mean, I think State was down 5 defensive linemen, 5 D tackles, starting week 2, due to injury or other issues, and so Mississippi State obviously knows that, but that's a glaring need, and so I think you can be concerned because I'm concerned. But I think it's important to be patient and not panic. It is what it is. I mean, our emotional energy is not going to change it. But I'm sure they'll get some guys. But I would like to see some guys that after this weekend, you're going to have a lot of guys going to portal too, and the State's got to go overpay for a difference maker on the interior. They need to do that.
Okay, I don't envy Mark Butler right now. Do you?
Well, I mean, I don't begin to imagine. I mean, when we've even had a couple of kids that have referred us to their agents for interviews, and that's new for me, so no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it. Well, we have the choice, right? If you're Mark Butler, you're a personnel guy around the country, you got to deal with these guys, and more times than not, you're dealing with the agent more than you're dealing with the player. And so the relationship building aspect of recruiting, at least for this year, has been arrested. That's just not what you're doing. Everybody out there is like, okay, well, hey, we have to have a commitment that it's going to be at least $250,000 before we even agree to take the visit. We're not going to get on a plane unless this is our asking price, and if you're not prepared to meet that, we're not even going to visit your school. There's no point in us continuing a relationship. That's what we're dealing with right now. And you got some very average players out there that are going to be making tens of thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah, you do. You do.
And so that's what your players are dealing with. And let's be honest, these agents, they're trying to get the best deal for their clients because you've never had rev share. Like, you've never had that to deal with in the past. And so these numbers are skyrocketing. And I think this is going to be a very interesting transition for college football before they really put some parameters about this. And it's interesting that there's a lot of people that know very little that have a lot to say. And right now there is no cap. That's what people don't seem to understand. There is no cap. Everybody's like, well, the rev share hadn't been voted on yet. So people are basically spending whatever they want to. And there's a lot of schools out there that have a lot more money. And so as a result, they're spending a lot more money to get players. And so we talked about it being the Wild Wild West last year. This is like the Wild West on steroids.
Wild. You're right, though. You're going to have a bunch of average to solid players making a lot of money. I still think the hit rate is somewhere between 30 and 40% in the portal. I think it's right around there, Steve. How would you handicap it?
Oh, I think it'll be less this year.
20 to 30?
Yeah, I think it'll be 20 to 30 this year just because of the fact that I think you're having to overpay because, and this is not Mississippi State specific, but I think, when you've got these kids out here, and I guess this is my get off of my lawn speech, but, I remember those days when guys pick schools because they identified with a school. It's like, hey, well, this school exemplifies the values, and I love this coaching staff and the tradition of this program. And, I grew up, watching Bo Jackson play at Auburn, and I've always wanted to wear his number, that sort of stuff. The naivety of youth is gone in college football because nobody out here is picking any school, at least out of the portal. In high school, it's a little bit different. But out of the portal, nobody is picking a school because of a school, because of a coaching staff.
Right.
They're essentially going to the highest bidder, or at least, picking their favorite among the highest bidders. And again, it's changing.
Right. All right. Yeah, I don't envy Mark Butler for our listeners is basically Levy's head of personnel, GM, whatever you want to call it. And he and Levy are in the bunker trying to find enough players. So Steve mentioned 15 players. If the hit rate is 20 to 30%, you can do the math. I mean, that's why I would think they would go 20 players, but I would think you've got to find a minimum of 6 starters, maybe 8, and they're not going to do that at 15. But we'll see. All right, man. Steve Robertson, good luck the next few days. Not going to be a lot of sleep. See you, man.
See ya.
GenesPage.com, 247 Sports. Thanks for listening to the Out of Bounds Show. Lunch today is brought to you by Aplos in the Renaissance and Aplos in Highland Village. And Jackson Meadows likes to call it the Ye rotation. And he has hit it many of times. But they've got wonderful pizzas and all kinds of delicious appetizers. Aplos in the Renaissance, Aplos in Highland Village. And we'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy hoops. Mississippi State, Central Michigan in the Coliseum.